short end of the story is about 14 years ago, around this time of year, actually, a little bit before this, I met a friend of a friend. My friend is a jazz musician. He was filming a video for one of his newer songs. He wanted his friends to be extra. So I get there, I'm thinking I'm late and actually a little early. And so the director says to me and another a guy who's there, you guys speak outside for a little bit. And so while we film some solo scenes and then we'll bring the rest of the crowd in. So the friend of a friend and I are just talking about music, and then he starts asking me random questions about what type of degree do I have and what type of flexibility do I have in my schedule. And then finally he says, the reason I'm asking you these things is because I teach this class at Temple and I can't do it anymore. And I think you would be a perfect fit for it. If you're interested, I can get you an interview with the department chair and he'll ultimately make the decision. I said, sure, what's the class called? And he said, Hip Hop and Black Culture. And I almost fainted. I said, you mean you teach a hip hop class at the university? And he said, I do. And he says, I think you'd be a perfect fit for it. And so that was a Wednesday night in July in 2011. And he calls me the next day and says, can you meet the department chair at noon on Friday? He said, I'll be there. So I went there, interviewed with the chair. And, and then after we go through the interview process, he introduced me to some of the graduate students and kind of talked to them a little bit. And then he finally said, listen, you've got the gig. Go talk to our department administrator. She'll set you up with the paperwork, and then you'll begin from there. And the thing that I tell people often is back then, I didn't really know the tiers of professorships in terms of what were the expectations and things like that. All I knew that I was asked to be a professor. So I got brought in and I started working as though I was what we would call a full professor or an assistant professor, even back then.
Okay.
So I really threw myself into the preparation and remodeling the class and re-envisioning what it could be. And then like writing articles and doing periodic media, speaking at conferences and things like that, not realizing that these are the expectations for someone who was more senior than me. And so just over time, it just continued to grow. That first semester, I had about 27 students thereabout, and it was an incredible experience. And I got asked to come back again. I think I had 32 students the next semester, and it just kept kind of growing from there. But that's really how I got my start, though.
Yeah, and what was the first class called again? And kind of what was the premise, or what was the what did they hope to get from going through the course?
Sure. The course was called Hip Hop and Black Culture.
Yep.
That's the course that got me into academia. I taught that course for about 12, 13 years, thereabout. And the big idea around the class is that hip hop is what I call an African derived aesthetic. It's an African folk art birthed in America. It continues many African traditions and cultural techniques and the like. And then also that hip hop in a lot of ways is a microcosm of the Black experience. And so I divided the course content into thirds. The first third, we looked at hip hop's evolution from African cultural continuity. And then in that segment, we also looked at hip hop's evolution from Black music in America. So evolving from spirituals, blues, jazz, ragtime, soul, rock, reggae, like those are all hip hop's ancestors. So we did that the first third of the class. The second third, we looked at hip hop history. And so we started a little bit before 1973 to give you context of what the Bronx was like when Kool Herc and his sister threw the party, when him and Cindy threw the party on August 11th, 1973. And so we do that and we walk that history down into like maybe the mid 90s. And then the last thing we would do is like topical discussion. So we would talk about how hip hop in a lot of ways captures the Black experience. So we would talk about hip hop's use of the N word, hip hop's portrayal of women, hip hop's response to racial disparities in the criminal legal system, hip hop's response to police brutality, and like all of these various different elements. And it's in that segment, I would begin bringing artists to class too. So artists like Wyclef came to
Hey.
class, Freeway came through, Toby and Wigway came through, Lecrae, um, Russell, JID, like a bunch of people came through. Sky Zoo, Chill Moody, like just an array of different people. I was really fortunate over time, just that a lot of people that I had a great appreciation for were coming to class and things like that.
Yeah, so we're a big book podcast, so I'm always curious, like what books were integrated into it, or like articles or literature, like what kind of like fed the music with the articles. I mean, with the teachings. Like I'm just curious, like what books should we look out for?
Oh, that's a great question. So, in terms of hip hop and Black culture, the primary text of the course was Jeff Chang's "Can't Stop, Won't Stop,"
Okay.
and by my estimation, that's one of the best cursory views of hip hop history because Jeff Chang, in a lot of ways, does a really good job of capturing both the linear history, but also the contextual history of what was happening in each period that he walks through. And so I thought he does an excellent job of that. We also would read sections of Trisha Rose's Black Noise. And so, in a lot of ways, that's considered the foundational text of hip hop scholarship. She had the book published in 1994, and it really set the stage for what came after that. And then in our topical discussions, we would look at things that were relevant to what we're talking about. So we would look at Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, for example, Dr. Yamada Taylor's Race for Profit when we're talking about housing segregation. So we will pull a lot of different things into the conversation. But in terms of specific hip hop text, it was primarily Can't Stop, Won't Stop. There was also Black Noise. There was a brief period where we would look at a few sections from Steve Stout's The Tanning of America. Sometimes we might look at something like Imani Perry's Prophets of the Hood, things like that.
No, that's good to hear. And then from that, are the students when they get into the class, are they kind of listening to the albums together? Are we listening to it during the class, or is it kind of you do your own listening and then you bring it back? And how do you kind of think about the collaboration between listening as a group versus like kind of that independent listening that you kind of need with music and different arts?
That's a great question. We actually would do both.
Okay.
So literally every class we would listen to music in some capacity. And what I would tell the students that is was if the course is a book, the music we listen to are the pictures or illustrating the concepts. So we were literally listening to music every single class. And so I'll give you an example. So one of the first lessons that we would listen to, one of the first lessons I would teach was this broader idea about how rap music is simultaneously lyric poetry and performance art. How a rapper says something is just as important as the literal words that they say. And so there's this book critic, Sam Anderson, who writes for the New Yorker, and he wrote a review for the anthology of rap. And at the time that he wrote it, he hadn't heard any rap songs that he could remember outside of like a handful of songs.
Oh,
So he's reading a transcription of 300 rap songs that are showing the evolution of MCing, and he comes away with this set of like really unique and interesting opinions, right? So he gets some things right, like he says, like Jay-Z and Lupe Fiasco and Eminem are some of the greatest rappers of all
yep.
time, but then he gets some things really wrong. Like he will say things like he thought Nas was overrated, he thought Wu-Tang Clan was nonsensical, he thought Wayne at his peak wasn't a good rapper, and so he had a colleague at NPR, Franny Kelly, who was a music editor. She sent him 7 songs. She said, listen to these songs and see if your opinion changes. And then he saw like his opinion changed immediately.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, for example, when I teach that lesson, we read his review, then we listen to the songs that he listened to, and then we talk about how both the presentation, the delivery of the lyrics are just as impactful as the literal words that are being said. So so in class, we were listening to music and are listening to music pretty much every class. And then I would also have assignments that would require them to listen to music and then also synthesize the readings and come to a conclusion. So kind of doing a series of both.